I wanted to open with these two stories that are kind of back to back, and I think that they tell us a lot about who we are as human beings and who Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are as human beings. So let me, it's kind of a good news, bad news story. The good news is that the Kitty Genovese story, now you've got to be a certain age to remember this. This happened in 1964. There was a 28-year-old young woman, her name was Kitty Genovese, and sometimes it's pronounced Genovese, who lived in New York, and she was, as I recall, stabbed to death out in front of the apartment building where she lived while 38 people looked on. And or actually it was believed at the time that 38 people looked on. Now, we found later that the actual number was a whole lot smaller than that. Nobody's sure exactly what the number is, but still, nobody intervened. And so the story kind of became, well, people just don't care about other people. So to test this, a researcher at Lancaster University, Richard Philpott, looked, basically cut a deal with three cities: Amsterdam, Cape Town, Amsterdam in Holland, Cape Town in South Africa, and Lancaster in the United Kingdom in England, and got access to their security closed-circuit TV videos, the ones that view public places that the police use to backtrack on crimes, who was where, when, and all that kind of stuff, and looked at thousands of hours of closed-circuit television of actual assaults being happened. And they didn't stage any of this. These were actual cases where somebody's walking down the street and somebody jumps on them and starts wailing on them or trying to kill them or robbing them or whatever it may be, actual assaults. And they found 219 cases of these, and in 91% of the time, the bystanders stepped in. Now, we were having a conversation here in the studio about this a few minutes ago. Okay, this was the inner city in these three major cities. Is this something that is different between an urban environment and a rural environment? Well, that's one of the questions that the study doesn't answer. And in fact, the author of the study, Philpott, says this is going to be the next thing that we study, but we just don't have access to closed-circuit coverage in small towns and rural areas. So it's not going to be as easy, number one. And number two, none of these were in American cities. And Amsterdam, Holland, is a very socialist country. Cape Town has a long history of socialism, and the whole Mandela Revolution was very socialist, or in using that term in the democratic socialist context. And the United Kingdom has a long history of socialism, and they have a national health care system, things like that. Here in the United States, we're more laissez-faire. We don't so much look out for each other, at least at the level of government. And, we're at the level of government more likely to say, throw people to the wolves. So is it possible that what we're looking at is the baseline for humanity? That people jump in and help out other people 91% of the time simply because they're human beings? Or is it cultural? Does it have to do with where it happened? Will it be different in rural areas? Will it be different in areas? These three cities, the inner city of these three cities, are probably fairly, racially and wealth-wise, economically mixed up, heterogeneous rather than homogeneous. And would it be different in a more homogeneous area? I don't know. I'm inclined to think that this is human nature, that 91% of the time people help out. And it would be interesting to look at other primates. But, we certainly know that happens with primates and with dogs. I mean, those studies have been done. So, it's interesting. And, your thoughts on that. But here's the other side of this. Donald Trump and Mike Pence and John Kelly and Stephen Miller got together and decided that it would be a good idea to torture children coming from south of the border in order to discourage parents from bringing their children to the United States. Now, if you think that's extreme, John Kelly actually owned up to this on television. He obviously didn't use the word torture, But the idea of taking children away from their parents and putting them in cages for extended periods of time was something that John Kelly, not only as Donald Trump's chief of staff, as the guy who's the president's right-hand man, not only signed off on, but went public with. I mean, went on TV and said, yeah, this will have a discouraging effect. This is one of the reasons why we're doing this. And, Trump saluted that, and Pence saluted that, and this was, obviously, in fact, the stories that we hear from inside the White House, this was Stephen Miller's idea, or at least something that he was a strong advocate for. So now we're finding, I think they fall into that 9% of people who don't give a rat's ass and don't jump in and help and don't intervene. This is in today's Huffington Post. It's from the Associated Press. It's an AP story. The headline, migrant children separated from parents show signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And just, a few little clips from the article. Some of these children cried inconsolably. This is after they've been released. We're looking at the kids after they got out of federal custody, after ICE let them go, after they've been returned to their parents. Some cried inconsolably. Others believed their parents had abandoned them and were angry with their parents, or were confused. This is a quote from this report. This is a report, by the way, this is a report from the Inspector General's Office of the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. This isn't, some do-gooder group that came in and said, hey, let's find out what's going on. No, this is the Trump administration itself. Quote, other children expressed feelings of fear or guilt and became concerned for their parents' welfare. This is based on interviews with about 100 mental health clinicians who had regular interactions with these children. And then they tell some of the stories. One little boy, around 7 or 8 years old, was separated from his father and didn't know why, according to the Inspector General. He believed that his dad was killed and that he also would be killed. This child, and then, quote, this is from the program director, told investigators, this child ultimately required emergency psychiatric care to address his mental health distress. They go on to note some of the separated children suffered physical symptoms because of their mental trauma. One physician said, quote, you get a lot of my chest hurts, even though everything is fine medically. Children describe symptoms. Every heartbeat hurts. I can feel my heart. These, a clinician told investigators, are symptoms of emotional pain. They also found that the longer the children were in custody, the more their mental health deteriorated. Assistant Secretary Lynn Johnson of HHS said adverse media, talking about the need to get more mental health professionals into work with these kids. She said adverse media coverage and negative public perception have hampered efforts to expand that effort. And they talk about in one case, a child was moved from a Florida facility to Texas to be reunited with her father. After the child made several trips to the detention center, she was returned to the Florida facility, quote, in shambles. Now they mean, psychologically, without ever seeing her father. During the interview, there were almost 9,000 children in shelters. Nearly 85% were 13 to 17 years of age. 13% were 6 to 12-year-old. And 2% were infants to age 5. So the good news is human nature may not be as brutal and cruel as we think. The bad news is that Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, Mike Pence, and John Kelly are more brutal and unthinking and uncaring than we ever imagined. And as this is playing out in front of us, right now, they are still separating children from their parents and putting the kids in cages. It's mind-boggling. Oh, and they're also telling sick children in the United States who are here for care, get out, go die.